What's the creepiest true story that happened to you or someone you know? Serious. Somebody mailed my friend a bunch of pictures of his wife just going about her day. Some of them were taken through windows of their home. Police were called and everything. But nothing ever came of it. They actually moved because of it. Imagine. Your friend hired an agent to find out if his wife is cheating. The agent did not find anything, but gave him an envelope with his pics as proof of work. Wife finds this envelope and asks, "What is this?" "I don't know, it was in the mail like that." He is living a lie ever since. Context. My mom's college boyfriend became her stalker after she left his awful, abusive ass back in the mid-80s. Several years ago. Just before the last Harry Potter movie came out. My mom and I were marathoning the other 7 movies and at about 1 AM the phone rings. Normally we don't answer. We figure if it's important they'll leave a message. But a call that late at night is probably urgent. Mom answers and almost immediately her face changes and she tells me, "LVHQ. Go wake up your father." Comma. I've never seen my mom this scared. I run upstairs and get him. Back downstairs she's still on the phone and I have no idea what's going on. Dad has some words with the caller and we hug it out in the kitchen. This is when I found out my mom had a stalker. Despite him being silent for years. And their whole breakup happening halfway across the country. He somehow found us. Said he'd driven by our house. Complimented the neighborhood. Freaks me out to this day. Wondering how much he knows about us. And if I've ever talked to him unwittingly. Edit. I was only 4 when this happened. I was playing outside with my siblings and neighbors, and while they're busy playing, a lady approached me and took me to her place. A nearby neighborhood. After a while, everybody was freaking out and they started looking for me everywhere. This lady was severely depressed. Her husband left her after their son died. He couldn't handle her depression apparently. She took me to her place. Fed me and gave me tons of candy. For a couple days. She also made me wear her deceased son pajamas. At some point, she took me to buy some candy from the store. The store owner knew her, so he reported that to the police. She didn't hurt me at all. The doctor even said I was well fed. I always think of her and pray she's in a better place now. Even tried to go visit her when I was a college student. Her house was sold and she moved away apparently. Whoa. That is crazy. So you were legit kidnapped. That's probably the absolute luckiest kidnapping scenario ever. I was stalked by a 40-plus-year-old man from the ages of 10 till 14. My parents told me about it when I was 13. I was unaware, but they were. He had been following me to school. He had been mailing me things. Taking pictures of me. And sending my parents threatening messages in all sorts of way. When I was 19 I was visiting my grandmother in Indiana. Unfortunately she ended up in the hospital, so my mom and I took turns staying with her. One morning I was sleeping at my grandmother's house when I woke up to her front storm door slamming. I sat up and realized there was a chair next to me that wasn't there the night before. I got up and went to the front door. The main actual door was wide open and only the storm door was closed. A man was walking across the lawn. His back to me. Normal walking. For some reason I wasn't afraid. I also wasn't wearing my glasses, so I kind of assumed this guy was a postal worker. I didn't put the chair by the bed thing together until later. When the toilet seat slammed down and scared the out of me. But why was the toilet seat up? I am a girl. My mom's a girl. TLDR, some random dude peed in my grandmother's house and watched me sleep maybe. I was at a party at my friend Brian's house. I was really uncomfortable because I didn't really know anyone there and I knew that Brian's friends were really into drugs. I wound up just watching movies and drinking mixed drinks until I fell asleep in a chair. The next morning I was getting a glass of water and getting ready to leave when one of Brian's friends approached me. He asked me if Brian and I hooked up because he had heard so much noise coming from his bedroom. I said no and he continued to tease me about it. He was being creepy and insulting, so I just left. Later that morning, I found out that Brian had overdosed and died during the night. His friend had heard Brian moaning and thrashing around and thought that he was having sex. I've posted this before. Staying in a motel with my wife one night. She falls asleep really quickly, but for me it takes a while to drift off to sleep. So I'm lying there in the dark for a while and I distinctly hear a voice coming from somewhere in the room quietly, though just above a whisper, say, "I think they're asleep now." Immediate fright response. Bolt out of bed. Turn on all the lights and start frantically searching the room. I look in the bathroom behind the shower curtain. Under the bed. Nothing. It's a one-room motel room. The door is bolted shut. There's nobody else in the room. My wife is now freaked because of my actions. What I experienced is called a hypnagogic hallucination. And not an uncommon experience during the initial stages of sleep. But if I had not known what that was, I would have thought the room was haunted. Didn't you read about that guy who built a room in the ceiling of the hotel that he owned and watched everyone through specially angled ceiling vents? That could have actually been real, dude. This happened about 3 years ago or so. I was sitting in the kitchen. And it was around 10 PM or so. I heard a really loud thump in the basement. I live alone with 2 dogs, so any sound is somewhat frightening to me. So, as I'm walking down the stairs to the basement, I hear the thumping again. In an oddly rhythmic pattern. I creak open the door into the basement bedroom. And I see my dog is just ramming his head and body into the wall. Over and over. I can't explain to you how shockingly unnatural looking it was. It looked like he was controlled or something. I called him over. And he stopped and came upstairs with me. 3 hours later. I hear the thumping again. I get out of bed again. However, when I went down to check it, it was my other dog that was ramming his head into the wall. It was like he was possessed. Scared the cheese out of me. Since then, nothing like that has happened. But what an unexplainable event. Well, this girl I used to be in class with found out today that there's some random dude out there who tattooed a picture of her face on his leg. She doesn't know who he is. Just that he tagged her on Instagram with a picture of the tattoo. I feel like it's pretty damn creepy to have someone somewhere in the world walk around with your face on his leg. Friend was sleeping at home during summer when his housemates were away. He slept with the bedroom door open, which is horrifying enough, but woke up when he heard burglars walking up the stairs. He didn't do anything and just laid there terrified. And one of them closed the bedroom door. When they left, he found a knife in the kitchen that didn't belong to anyone in the house. Removed. I was getting used to a new laptop I had gotten around 2 months ago. The little green light next to the camera turned on shortly after I got it and signed into it. And it was always on. Even after I closed my camera apps and before I turned them on. My dad came into my room one night to talk to me before I went to sleep. While I was listening to music. Just as he was leaving. He said, "Do you know your camera is on?" I said no. "How do you know?" And he said, "The light is on." I looked directly at the light. And then at the camera. And for the first time, it turned off. My dad works in a factory and would often have people over for dinner etc. When I was a kid, most of the people he brought around were pretty rough around the edges and my dad was just trying to be loving towards them. My mom would get pretty annoyed because when you have 4 kids at home you don't bring home strange men. Finally my mom said enough. And it ended for the most part. Flash forward and we find out one of my dad's co-workers and a guy he brought home a few times, and someone that gave my mom the creeps, was convicted of murdering, cutting up, and putting the body of a young girl in trash bags and dumping her in a trash can a few miles from our house. It was on a side road in a ditch. She was the exact age of my sister and it happened in about a month's time around when he was visiting. After that my dad had no more visitors. My friend came home from school one day to find that her house had been broken into. She decided to go inside and look around whilst she called her mum. She was done looking at the 2nd floor when she made for the stairs. Her mum convinced her to go outside and wait for the police, who she had called. Later on, the police asked the family if they owned a crowbar. They said they didn't. They then said it looks like the offender was still in the house when she got home. And they were waiting at the top of the stairs with a crowbar, which they stupidly left behind when they fled. Edit. There were items that were disturbed upstairs, but only in the one place. Through the first door you see at the top of the stairs. That was the only room that was moved around, suggesting that that's where they were when she came home. My mom was stalked for years by someone we didn't know. They called over and hung up. Changing our phone number only stopped for a few days at a time. This was before caller ID. The police tried to get phone records but it came back with an error, or whatever, from their calls. Someone broke into our home a few times but never took anything obvious. The day caller ID came out we got one and within a few hours we got a routine hang-up call. The name said someone from our church. We thought maybe it was a mistake but we got several from that number. My parents were divorced but my dad went to the guy's house and talked to him and it all stopped. It's nowhere near as creepy as a lot of these stories, but was still unsettling. A few months ago, my husband and I decided to drive out of the city to view the Paciles meteor shower. We drove way out into the middle of nowhere. This is Texas, random turning down dirt roads for miles and miles. Finally we found a place, no lights anywhere. Hadn't passed any private driveways or homes in miles. We're on the hood of the car and we hear, out of the pitch black, someone, or something, screaming. No words. Just this long, drawn out scream, which sounded like a man. Our asses were off the hood and inside the car. Doors locked. Before it stopped. I've seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That. Before my divorce, my ex-husband and I were separated. I went to bed in my home. He had never lived with me there, and I woke up with him in my bed. I started screaming as soon as I realized I felt an arm under my covers. I just knew he was finally going to chop me up into little pieces. He saw nothing wrong with breaking into my home because he missed me. I had a girl stalk me my first semester of college. For the first few weeks she would stand outside my dorm and outside of my classroom buildings and follow me. She usually didn't speak to me but when I moved dorms she appeared in the lobby of my dorm and yelled "Fire Investigator 113. How dare you move without telling me? I had to find you again." It all came to a head one day when she just showed up after my friend left to go to class and screamed "How dare you go to Nashville with that?" Which was creepy because no one else knew where we went since we left at midnight on a whim. I finally went off on her. Found out she tried to kill herself in her dorm room by burning her wrists with a curling iron while screaming about how I and several other guys had ruined her life. Mom walking through house with a realtor. 3-year-old me in tow. Realtor mentions that the house used to be an orphanage. Mom loves old houses. This one had plenty of rooms and old house winess. About 15 minutes in, 3-year-old me kept asking, "Where'd that little boy go?" Too spooky for mom. Edit. When my sis and I were little, my parents were in the market for a house. They found one they loved, so they brought us to see it. Both of us started crying and screaming when they opened the door to the very normal, fully finished basement. Close the door. Take us into the backyard to calm us down. Then take us on a tour again. Same problem. Sis and I are terrified of the nice basement. My parents opted not to buy the house with the portal to hell only children can see. When my friend was in 8th grade or so, he went trick-or-treating without his mom for the first time. He and his friend had finished and they were heading home when they noticed a pair of headlights up the road. They thought nothing of it until it started moving towards them. They started to walk a bit faster and when they went around the corner, they noticed the car had its lights off. This scared the living hell out of them and they darted home, losing all their candy in the process. When they finally got home, the car pulled up to his driveway, then into the garage. It turns out it had been his mother following him the whole time. My uncle owned a 200+ year old farmhouse, and when they sold it I helped him clean it out. On the last day all that needed to be done was sweep. There was no furniture etc. and I got there before him. I was standing in the living room and I heard what sounded like TV chatter upstairs, like when someone is watching a TV in a different room, or people talking, followed by a very loud bang like someone pushed over a large bureau. I got out of there quick. My aunt and uncle slept with the light on for 30 years, and that, plus some other experiences, make me see why. Another time I felt someone sit on my bed while I was facing the wall and place their hand on my shoulder. I've never felt anything like it. Suppose I'm pretty late. But anyway. Long story short, I was staying at a friend's house and woke up to someone else in the bed with us, who was breathing on my face. I could see from the street lamp that my friend was turned away from me when I sat up, and that there was actually someone else there too. I also really gently reached out and touched them and felt what felt like an eyebrow furrowed. And they appeared to be asleep. Can't explain why I didn't scream or anything. I tend to think about what to do given that I have the time to. I decided to lay down and not move, and if they did something that could have meant trouble, then I would react. I didn't sleep and watched as this person got up and walked out of the room, down the stairs and out the door. I locked the doors after and didn't sleep for days. Just freaks me out that someone welcomes themselves into a home and just climbs into bed with two girls. My friend doesn't even believe me. My grandma died during the late 90s. My cousin, who was her favorite, was asked to find her favorite dress so she could wear it while people visit her at the funerary. The thing is, my grandma's closet is as huge as a fitting room. Think 6 cubicles, 2 rows, 3 columns. After about an hour of searching cause he can't find it, he mutters something like, "If only someone would help me." The next closet door he opens, the dress just falls in front of him. A close co-worker of mine has 2 daughters. She was telling me a story of one time of how her younger daughter would sleep in bed with her because she was afraid to sleep by herself. She was about 4-5 years old at the time. Well, one night the little girl is laying in bed with her mom and starts staring at a dark corner in her room. My co-worker asks her daughter Lily, "What's wrong?" The little girl goes, "Mommy, who is that old lady in the corner?" Obviously this creeped my co-worker out, but she wanted to get to the bottom of it more. So over the weeks she showed her daughter pictures of her older ancestors, both alive and deceased. Turns out, the little girl ending up identifying the woman in the room as my co-worker's great-grandmother, who was many years past. Creepy stuff. If my kid ever sees a ghost, I'm gonna do an old dead person lineup of photos where I just show her one at a time and mix in some strange dead people so she doesn't just point at a random relation. Can anyone recommend a good, funny thread to read after this? I have the heebie-jeebies. Friend was home alone reading a Stephen King novel. It was strictly forgotten as her family was really religious, so she was nervous about the whole opening yourself up to demons aspect of it. While she's reading, one of the metal butterflies on the wall popped off the wall and bounced into the room. That book went into the outside trash immediately, which was also nerve-wracking, because going outside at night after that. Which book? I remember reading Pet Sematary at night during hot summer. Near the scene with Revival of Cat, I heard outside 2 cats banging with meow sounds. I had audio background that completely fitted into the setting of a novel. With such a low bar for evidence, I imagine life is rather frightening. Loud sound. I must have done something wrong. Me and a friend had been playing football in a park, and when we got bored we decided to go in the kids' play area to talk for a bit. It was dark at this point since it was late October. It was empty except for us and one other person sitting on a bench about 10 meters away from us. We ignored it at first thinking they had a kid playing or something, but after about an hour they were still there, staring off into the distance. It was so dark we couldn't tell if it was a man or woman or anything other than it was an adult, judging by their size. We considered going over to them and asking for the time just to see who they were, but we pussied out. We were only 14-15. They continued to stare off into the distance even after we left. Granted, it ain't that creepy, In retrospect it was probably a drug deal or something, but it was unnerving as hell at the time. Simply because they didn't do anything. Not even check their phone or acknowledge us. Edit. Not jungle gym. Swings and slides and. I lived out in the countryside a few years back. Shortly after moving in, I was awoken in the early hours of the morning by what sounded like a woman screaming and screaming. All sorts of scenarios raced through my mind. Is she being uphead? Murdered, etc. I looked out the window but couldn't see anything. I promptly called the police. When they arrived a short while later, they also heard distant screaming, so became alarmed too. Out came a police dog. Long story short, they found the source of the screaming. Fox is having a shag. Oh, the bloody shame of it. Edit. TL. DR. I'm not sure if this is creepy, but it was scary. My wife and I were hiking the Pacific Coast Trail on Vancouver Island. The first 2 nights we had raccoons visit the campsite. They allowed. Knock stuff over. Try to get the food bag. Sniff and snort at the tent. If you don't know it's raccoons, it would be scary, but trash pandas are adorable, so not scary. Third night, no raccoons, but I was awoken by my wife because of something sniffing the tent. No other noise, just sniffs at different points on the tent. I laid in fear for what seemed like eternity. Every couple minutes it felt like I could feel the breath of each sniff. It finally stops and we fall back fitful sleep. Well, the sun comes up and we wake. All around the camp are paw prints. Huge paw prints. We were in sand and the wet sand had perfect prints of 2 cougars. Mom and cub. They were around our site for over an hour. Only noise they made was sniffing the tent. I'll never forget the feeling I had that night, and then the realization that it was cougars. 1959. I was 11 years old. Our family was visiting my dad's cousin in Palo Alto in California. Dad's cousin took us to the top of the Mark famous restaurant bar in San Francisco. Kids weren't allowed in, so we waited in the elevator lobby outside the bar. I hopped up onto the window ledge to sit and leaned back against the window, which after a few seconds swung right open and I fell out and was looking at the ground a few hundred feet below. Nothing to grab onto, was past the point of no return. The fall had begun. Suddenly a long arm was thrust out of the window and grabbed a handful of my jacket and hauled me back inside. Landed on my feet and turned to say something to the person who just saved my life, and there was nobody there. I turned to my mother to ask her what had just happened, and she just threw her hands up into the air and said, "Don't even ask." There was nobody there except me, my brother and my mother. When I was super little, me and my twin brother, probably 4 years old at the time, were walking in Boston with mom and dad. Can't remember the setting exactly, but my brother and I were a bit ahead with my dad while mom was hanging back a bit. Next thing she knew, a really old man had come up to her. He was non-threatening, so my mom wasn't scared until she began to talk with him. "Are those your twins?" he had asked. She said he had a German accent. My mother said yes, and she expected a typical comment like, "Are they identical? Or how old?" But the old man's response was actually, "I used to study twins with Dr. Mengel." My mom caught up to us and hightailed it the hell out of there. We bought property next to a very old cemetery. Most people in it died in the 1800s and early 1900s. Anyway, my daughter was only 3 when moved to our property. Soon, she's talking about a friend she met and is playing with. I think she's just got an imaginary friend. She keeps giving me details, age, sex, name, etc. One day, she says, "Mom, let me show you where my friend is," and she leads me to a gravestone. It was the same name, sex, and age of the little boy in the grave. Again, she was only 3 and couldn't read. TLDR. Children can see ghosts.